They thought I'd back down, that I'd sigh, maybe curse under my breath, and find another gate to retire behind. But see, when you drop a 2-ton concrete block in front of my driveway like it's a mafia warning, you're not dealing with just any old retiree. You're dealing with a guy who spent 40 years designing public infrastructure, knows land plats better than sports stats, and has enough time and money to make your little HOA kingdom crumble like a stale cookie. That morning, I just stood there, coffee in one hand, eyebrow raised, and thought, well, now this is going to be fun. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If you're into real lifestyle stories with shocking twists, sweet justice, and just the right dose of HOA drama, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story? It's got more turns than a cul-de-sac HOA meeting gone sideways. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, I'm not new to conflict. I spent 4 decades in infrastructure design, fought budget battles nastier than a family Thanksgiving. But Clarissa? She strutted up to our property line like a mall cop with a badge, clutching a cease and desist like it was the Declaration of Independence, claimed our gate was a visual threat to neighborhood integrity. The way she said it, you'd think I'd erected a flaming tire sculpture, not a modest wooden entry that blended with the hillside. My wife, Joan, who could draft a lawsuit with one hand and cook chili with the other, raised an eyebrow and whispered, "She thinks we're amateurs." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because while Clarissa was busy talking about bylaws, I was already thinking about land deeds. See, what Clarissa failed to realize is that I don't shout, I survey. I don't panic, I investigate. That little stretch of pavement between my land and the main road, turns out it wasn't actually owned by the HOA. It was part of an old developer's plan that fizzled out after the 2008 crash. Paperwork got dusty, boundaries got blurred, and Clarissa saw a gray area and painted it power pink. According to her, since my gate could be seen from their access road, she had full authority to stop construction. According to me and the county recorder's office, she was trespassing on a mistake. Joan called it the gilded loophole. I called it opportunity. Because if there's one thing HOA tyrants hate more than tall grass, it's being run. That night, Joan and I sat at the kitchen table, sipping bourbon and flipping through maps like it was game night. We weren't angry. Not really. You get to a certain age and you realize that anger's a poor investment. What we felt was colder, focused, strategic. I'd been called stubborn before, but there's a difference between stubborn and surgical. I wasn't going to raise hell. I was going to raise options. While Clarissa was busy writing violation notices, I was busy making a list. Land use attorney, title specialist, old friend who used to work in zoning enforcement. Let her play chess, I'd rewrite the board. Because when someone tries to gatekeep a road they don't even own, sometimes the smartest move is to buy the boardwalk under their feet. And that's exactly what I planned to do, not out of spite, but principle. Because this wasn't about a gate. This was about a woman with too much power and not enough oversight, a neighborhood drunk on rules, and a man, me, who'd spent his whole life learning how systems fail. Clarissa thought she was dealing with a tired old man who just wanted a quiet retirement. She was wrong. She was dealing with a licensed surveyor who never lost a boundary dispute in his life. She was dealing with a husband who still remembered how to win with a smile. And most importantly, she was dealing with a man who knew the one thing she didn't. Sometimes the fastest way to shut down a petty dictatorship is to own the road into town. I've always said, if you want the truth, don't go to war, go to records. Joan and I were back at the county offices the next morning, and let me tell you, nothing clears the sinuses like sifting through 3 decades of zoning maps and dusty plat diagrams. While most folks think a courthouse is where justice happens, the real power lives in the archives, buried under coffee-stained folders and the kind of language only a lawyer could love. We weren't looking for a smoking gun. We were looking for a missing signature. Clarissa had acted like she owned the road. But I had a hunch. When someone gets that cocky, it usually means they've never read the fine print. And brother, we were about to read every line. Turns out, the access road in front of our gate, Bennett Drive, wasn't what it seemed. On paper, it was a ghost. The original subdivision plat listed it as common community access, But the transfer of title never happened. In 2009, the developer went belly up during the crash, and like a lot of half-finished dreams back then, the road fell through the cracks. The HOA had been managing it, sure, but managing doesn't mean owning. It's like mowing your neighbor's lawn for a decade and then trying to sell it. Clarissa had mistaken familiarity for authority, and I was about to remind her that real estate doesn't run on feelings, it runs on filing. And that's when Sonia Mita entered the picture. Joan called her from the car while I drove us home, and from the moment she answered the phone, we knew we had the right one. Sonia was precise, calm, and had the kind of clipped efficiency that makes you sit up straighter even through a speakerphone. Former property litigator turned independent bulldog, and Joan explained the situation. Sonia didn't hesitate. If the HOA doesn't hold the deed, their authority is borrowed. Let's find out who actually owns the road. I could almost hear the gears grinding on Clarissa's kingdom. The kind of gears that hadn't been oiled since the Reagan administration. Later that afternoon, Sonia came over with her laptop, a legal pad, and what I can only describe as the calm of a woman who'd brought down bigger empires with less. We sat on the back porch while she clicked through county databases like a surgeon with a scalpel. Within an hour, she found it. Beacon Hill Ventures, a holding company created during the original bankruptcy that had absorbed all unclaimed assets from the failed developer, including Bennett Drive. The best part, they hadn't done anything with it in years, paid the taxes, filed the bare minimum, and clearly didn't even realize they still owned it. I leaned back in my chair, watching the sun slip behind the hills, and whispered, "So, you're telling me the road Clarissa's using to block my gate doesn't even belong to her?" Sonia smiled. "Legally, it's a zombie asset. But yes, she's been bluffing on borrowed land." Now here's where things get interesting. See, in poker, knowing what your opponent doesn't have is just as valuable as your own hand. Clarissa had been playing like she held aces, but now we knew she was holding air. Sonia explained that if Beacon Hill Ventures was willing to sell, and given the asset's dormancy, it was likely we could own the road outright. Let that sink in. The very pavement they used to block our access could be ours. I looked at Joan, and for a long second we said nothing. 'Cause we both knew what this meant. This wasn't just leverage. This was the board flip. The kind that doesn't just change the game. It changes the room it's played in. But we weren't going to run in waving documents like kids with a new toy. No, that's not how you handle power when you've earned it. We agreed to move quietly, keep Clarissa comfortable in her illusion of control while we lined up the real pieces. Sonia would reach out to Beacon Hill discreetly, framing our interest as access clarity rather than full-blown acquisition. Meanwhile, Joan and I would keep our heads down, pretend to comply, nod politely at violation letters, and file every last one. The trap wasn't sprung yet, but the bait was in place. And I'll tell you something. For the first time in this whole saga, I started to enjoy myself. Because when you've been underestimated, the best revenge isn't loud, it's legal. And it's coming. Buying a road isn't as glamorous as it sounds. No ribbon cutting, no champagne bottle smashing, just a wire transfer and a thick envelope from a holding company that had no clue they still owned part of suburban Colorado. But there it was, Bennett Drive, legally and officially mine. I didn't even have to haggle. Turns out Beacon Hill Ventures was thrilled to get rid of it. Said it was clutter on the books. I smiled and said I'd be happy to clean it up. Clarissa had no idea the concrete she ordered to block me was now sitting on my property. And oh, how sweet that silence was, the kind that hums with possibility, the kind that makes you want to sit back and let the dominoes stack a little higher before the first one tips. And stack they did. Clarissa and her HOA soldiers doubled down in the worst possible way. We got notices every other day. One said our flower beds were unapproved flora. Another cited our mailbox as non-conforming to community symmetry, whatever that meant. They even went after Joan's bird feeders, claiming they were attracting the wrong type of wildlife. I almost hoped they'd accuse us of harboring crows with a criminal record just to round out the insanity. Every letter came with the same smug tone, the same passive-aggressive phrasing dressed in legal tinsel, and every time we smiled, took a photo, and filed it away. Let them build their paper wall. We were about to bulldoze it with facts. Meanwhile, Joe played the gracious neighbor, waving at Clarissa like nothing was wrong. I'd stroll by HOA meetings with my coffee, nod politely, and pretend we were still blissfully unaware of their vendetta. It drove them nuts. See, folks like Clarissa want a show. They want drama, pushback, angry emails, something to prove their importance. But when you give them calm, cheerful silence, that's when they start sweating. It's like a magician who pulls the rabbit out of the hat, and the audience just yawns. Clarissa thought she was tightening a noose. What she didn't see was that I had turned the rope into a leash, and she was walking herself straight into it. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Sonia and I finalized the paperwork and drafted an official notice for the HOA. It wasn't aggressive, just informative. It outlined the transfer of ownership for Bennett Drive, included documentation from the county, and introduced something I'd cheekily titled the Bennett Access Use Agreement. It required the HOA to remove all unauthorized structures from my road, starting with that lovely slab of concrete, and set a fair monthly fee for continued access, 3 times their current HOA dues. Clarissa had made it personal. I was just making it proportional. Joan called it poetic justice. I called it the Graham gravel tax. We delivered it during the HOA's monthly board meeting, timed to land right after their budget review. Sonia joined me, of course, looking every bit the legal buzzsaw she is, while I wore my nicest denim jacket, just to keep things neighborly. Clarissa's face when she read the letter went from cream to chalk in 5 seconds flat. Her hand shook. Robert, the vice president with a beer belly and a Rolex, squinted at the paper like it had personally insulted him. The silence in that room was golden, and just as the first voice rose to ask, "Wait, does that mean he owns the road?" I smiled, tipped my hat, and said, "I believe that's what the county records reflect." Then I walked out, slow and steady, while the board scrambled behind me like a dropped tray of silverware. And that, my friend, was just the beginning of the payment plan. Because once you control the road, you control the rules of the game. And I wasn't just changing the rules. I was rewriting the map. If you've never seen a room full of smug people realize they've been living a lie, let me tell you, it's better than front row seats at a magic show. The moment Sonia passed out those deed documents at the HOA meeting, you could feel the oxygen evacuate the room like someone had pulled the fire alarm on Clarissa's ego. There she was, the queen of bylaws, standing behind a folding table like a substitute teacher who'd lost the syllabus. Her mouth moved, but her words landed like a bad internet connection. Buffering, gone. One man in the back squinted at the paperwork and asked, "Wait, so if Graham owns the road, where's all that maintenance money been going?" That was the question that turned murmurs into murmuring. And just like that, the power started slipping right through her manicured fingers. By sunrise the next day, Oak Terrace was buzzing. And I don't mean a couple of neighbors gossiping. I mean full-on garage huddles, cul-de-sac summits, and back fence Q&As that ran longer than most church services. People were angry, but not at me. No, I was the guy who revealed the trick behind the curtain. They were angry at the fact they'd been paying for the upkeep of a road they didn't own. Worse, they'd been using it like tenants borrowing the landlord's driveway without permission. It was like finding out your HOA was charging rent for the neighbor's shed. I didn't have to lift a finger. Truth was doing all the heavy lifting. Now, I could have gone scorched earth. Some folks would have. But I had no interest in looking like the villain in Clarissa's bedtime stories. I wanted to prove that control doesn't require chaos. So I took the quiet route. First came the signs, 2 of them, hand-carved and tasteful. Private road, access by permission only. Beneath that, for permits, contact West Family Holdings. No threats, no capital letters, just calm, cool, and legally sound. Then came the cameras. Small, unobtrusive, with a clear view of every turn and corner. Joan called them our little eyes on the empire. I preferred insurance policies with Wi-Fi. Either way, they worked like a charm. Because 2 nights later, someone decided to get brave, or stupid, depending on your perspective. Dean Carter, Clarissa's right hand and self-declared HOA enforcer, took it upon himself to restore order. You ever seen a man in orthopedic sneakers try to commit vandalism? It's like watching a toddler swing a hammer. The footage showed Dean pulling up just after midnight, headlights off like a teenager, sneaking out for a joyride. He stomped across Bennett Drive in his polyester windbreaker, walked right up to one of my signs and kicked it like it owed him money. Then, and I kid you not, he grabbed the post and tried to yank it out of the ground with both hands. Took him 3 tries. He finally wrenched it loose, lost his balance, and landed flat on his back in a patch of native wildflowers. I've seen better takedowns in a Home Depot parking lot. The next morning, I handed the footage to the sheriff's office, along with a tidy little report titled Destruction of Private Property. I wasn't looking for a lawsuit, just a record. Dean got a citation and a visit from Deputy Taylor, a good-natured guy who looked like he'd rather be fishing. "Never thought I'd be writing up an HOA board member," he muttered. "Guess there's the first time for everything." Clarissa tried to spin it, of course, claimed Dean was removing unauthorized signage. When Sonia sent her a formal cease and desist, she went quiet. The thing about HOA power, it only works if people believe in it. Once the illusion breaks, the whole show falls apart, like a dollar store tent in a thunderstorm. After Dean's little stunt hit the grapevine, the mood in the community shifted. Neighbors who'd once kept their heads down started asking real questions. Why didn't we know who owned the road? What else have we been paying for? Why were Graham and Joan harassed if they're not even part of our HOA? People started digging. Someone pulled up old budgets and noticed odd line items like $9,000.00 for beautification consultants. Another found minutes from board meetings mysteriously missing from the website. The spell was breaking, and Clarissa could feel it. She started sending out defensive emails, full of vague language and lawyerly buzzwords, hoping to scare folks back into line. It didn't work. And the best part? I still hadn't played my final card. Because this whole time, Clarissa thought the road was the issue. But what she didn't realize was this. The road was just the fuse. The real explosion? That was still coming. And when it hit, it wouldn't just shake the board, it would crack open the whole damn HOA. I never thought I'd hear the words, "I want to make a deal," from Dean Carter, especially not while he was wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and sipping lukewarm coffee like it was penance. But there we were, sitting in a corner booth at a diner 2 towns over, surrounded by the clink of forks and the low hum of other people's problems. Dean looked like a man who'd just watched his retirement plan slide into a shredder. No blazer, no smug HOA swagger, just a guy who'd realized too late that backing the wrong queen gets your own crown cracked. He didn't even try to fake confidence. "Clarissa's out of control," he said quietly, "and I'm not going down with her." That was the moment I knew. The empire had sprung a leak, and its own vice president was bailing water. At first, I thought Dean just wanted to save face, but then he started talking. Really talking. According to him, Clarissa had been playing fast and loose with HOA funds for years, vacation board retreats to Napa, billed as community planning sessions, a $14,000.00 line item labeled equipment repair that somehow ended up as cosmetic surgery receipts. Dean admitted he'd objected at first, but like most folks who swim too long in dirty water, he got used to the temperature. Clarissa covered his boat slip fees, called it lake safety enforcement. He showed me the emails, the doctored invoices, the digital trail they thought no one would ever check. And just like that, I wasn't just holding the deed to the road, I was holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. Now, I'm not a cruel man, but I do believe in consequences, so I laid it out plain. "Dean," I said, "you're going to give me everything. The files, the receipts, the communications. In exchange, I won't pursue you personally for property damage or financial misconduct. But make no mistake, Clarissa's going down." He nodded like a man accepting gravity for the first time. By that evening, Sonia had the thumb drive in her hands, and Joan was printing out the spreadsheet Dean emailed us under the subject line, "I'm sorry." That's when the scale of it really hit us. This wasn't petty theft. This was structural rot, disguised as neighborhood pride. We drafted the terms the next day. 4 points. 1. Clarissa and any implicated board members resign immediately. 2. The HOA formally recognizes my ownership of Bennett Drive and ceases all enforcement efforts related to our property. 3. A full forensic audit of HOA finances, conducted by an independent CPA. 4. A reformed board is elected with term limits, community oversight, and, get this, mandatory financial transparency training. We didn't send it as a request. Sonia sent it as a settlement offer, and every sentence might as well have been written in concrete. They could accept the terms and step down with a sliver of dignity, or refuse and watch us turn over the entire file to the district attorney. Clarissa, of course, refused, sent back a 2-line email through the HOA attorney that basically boiled down to, "Prove it." So we did. Joan printed copies of everything and slid them, neatly labeled and highlighted, into resident mailboxes. I knew I'd struck a nerve when 3 board members resigned within 24 hours. One cited personal health reasons, another blamed a toxic environment, and the third just wrote "no comment" on a sticky note and taped it to her garage. Clarissa stayed silent. For a moment I thought she might actually try to outlast the storm. But then Dean, in one final act of desperation or decency, maybe both, stood up at a surprise community meeting and told everyone the truth. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He just laid it all out. How the board had manipulated budgets, bullied dissenters, and used HOA funds like their own private ATM. Clarissa, he said, had turned the HOA into her own personal kingdom, and everyone else just played along because they were too scared, too tired, or too hopeful things would eventually get better. But they didn't. Dean said, his voice cracking slightly. "And that's on me too. I'll give him this. He owned his part." And in that moment, something shifted in the room. People weren't just angry anymore. They were awake. And Clarissa, she was nowhere to be found. If Clarissa Monroe had one last card up her sleeve, she never got the chance to play it. After Dean's confession went public, she disappeared from neighborhood life like a bad rumor on mute. The next special meeting wasn't called by the HOA, it was called by the residents, and this time they came armed not with pitchforks, but clipboards. The clubhouse overflowed, not with hostility but with focus. Sonia and I sat in the back, watching people who had once whispered behind curtains now speak into microphones with trembling voices and bold intent. By a nearly unanimous vote, the entire board was dismissed. In their place, a provisional committee was installed, neighbors who actually believed in service, not surveillance. And then, like icing on poetic justice, they turned to me and asked if I'd serve as an advisor to help clean up the mess. I looked over at Joan, who grinned and shrugged, like, "Well, you did start this." I said, "Yes, of course, not out of pride, but because you don't rebuild a neighborhood by walking away from it." The next few weeks were a blur of reform. Sonia helped draft a set of revised bylaws that required term limits, public budgets, and regular community audits. We turned the HOA from a castle of control into a front porch of accountability. But there was still one symbolic act I needed to finish. Something that started it all. So I took that original concrete slab, the same one Clarissa ordered to block our gate, and had it reshaped into a fountain. Nothing grand, just a clean, sturdy stone circle with a gentle cascade and a bronze plaque that read, "Dedicated to Oak Terrace, it's never too late to do the right thing." I placed it near the road entrance, where every resident would see it on the way home. Some laughed, others nodded, a few teared up. Only Joan and I knew just how much story lived inside that slab. As for the road itself, I didn't want to keep it. Owning Bennett Drive had served its purpose, but power should never be permanent. So, with Sonia's help, we transferred the deed to a newly formed community trust, a nonprofit entity made up of 3 neutral residents, with one condition baked into the covenant: the road would forever guarantee open access to all homeowners and to our property, with any policy changes requiring a 75% vote of affected owners, not just a board vote. That clause was my line in the sand, because people can forget goodwill, but they remember what's in writing. And for the first time since we bought our land, Joan and I could drive through our own gate without a knot in our stomachs or a citation in our mailbox. Meanwhile, justice decided to take a walk of its own. Clarissa was officially indicted 6 weeks later. Multiple counts: fraud, misappropriation of funds, and obstruction. The DA's office found even more than we had: kickbacks from contractors, personal expenses hidden in community budgets, and what looked like a forged audit from 2 years back. The story made the local paper under the headline, "The HOA President After Resident Reveals Road Scam." I didn't gloat. Honestly, I didn't feel much of anything. Watching someone unravel in public isn't a victory. It's a warning. Clarissa eventually sold her house quietly and moved out of state. Dean followed, probably hoping to outrun the Whisper Network. But the rest of the neighborhood, they stayed and got better. Now, life is quiet again. The kind of quiet we actually paid for when we bought this land. Our garden's thriving, the grandkids run wild when they visit, and Joan has finally started writing that memoir she's been talking about for years. I serve as a mentor, not a monarch, offering advice when asked, staying out of the way when not. The HOA still exists, but these days it acts like a team instead of a tribunal, and every time I pass that fountain, I remember the lesson that costs so much to learn. When someone blocks your gate, don't fight at the fence. Own the whole driveway, rewrite the deed, and turn the barrier into a blessing. Some stories end with a bang. Mine ended with a gate, a fountain, and peace. Earned, not gifted. I didn't raise my voice, I raised my property line. I didn't take revenge. I took responsibility, and when the dust finally settled, I didn't just get my driveway back. I helped give a neighborhood its backbone. People think power is about titles, rules, control, but real power, it's quiet, it's measured, it's the kind that builds, not breaks. I didn't fight Clarissa because I needed to win. I fought because bullies rely on silence, and if you let one concrete block sit where it doesn't belong, next thing you know, someone's paving over your whole life. So if there's one thing I hope you carry from this story, it's this. You don't have to shout to stand up for yourself. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is gather your facts, hold your ground, and let truth do the heavy lifting. Because dignity, once defended, becomes legacy. If you got something out of this story, if it made you smile, made you think, or made you stand a little taller, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever had to stand your ground against something unfair? We want to hear it. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because the next story, let's just say, it's even wilder and packed with the kind of poetic justice that proves truth really is stranger than fiction. Thanks for listening, and remember, when they try to block your gate, just smile and start drawing up a blueprint.